Hello, welcome to Books and Brews,
the place where beer and literature meet.
with your host, the seer of the beer, Chris Powell.
And Laura Vosica, author of the Bluebells Chronicles.
Each month, we invite a guest author to read their works and talk about writing while sipping a beer specially paired to their work. This month's guest is Dona Masi. So sit back,
Pop a cold one,
and dive into some books.
and brews.
Welcome to Books and Brews, episode number 75 with Dona Masi. So, Laura, how has your month been? Other than sweaty and
right, sweaty, filthy. I think I broke my fingers pulling weeds. I've
there was
so
that.
many.
Oh boy.
So, however, we have had a very fruitful month. This is just one of our zucchinis. This thing is as wide across as my shoulders for those who can't see. Let's see, we found that we had pumpkins growing that we had not planted. So some days I go out and there's just a pumpkin laying in the grass. It's kind of like Jack's magic bean field, except with pumpkins.
With pumpkins, yeah.
Right. So we've got dozens of hundreds of banana peppers. We've got cucumbers. We've got gigantic onions. So we've had a lot of fun stuff growing in the garden. And I did see we have some raspberries today. And
that's fantastic.
yeah, it's been a rather uneventful month compared to being run over by a ram, almost being run over by the UTV. But my son and my daughter-in-law, they did come to visit us. And so that was very nice.
That's really awesome.
Yeah.
Did you read anything this month?
Well, yes. In fact, I read a book by Dona Masi called The Taking, and I really enjoyed it. I am supposed to be reading The Slide by Aaron Ryan, who is a previous guest, and I will get to that, Aaron. And bit by bit, I'm working through Wildlife Misadventures of Cosmo Bachelor, also by a previous guest, Michael Modleski. How about you?
Very good. Well, I've been reading a bunch of quantum stuff because I do quantum engineering at work. But other than that, been reading a book by Nicholas Nassim Taleb called Anti-Fragile, which is also very interesting, and how to make business more resilient. So I'm going to go out on a limb and again go out on a limb, and I keep falling off these limbs, thinking that this is probably very interesting this month.
Indeed. Yes. So today we have with us Dona Masi. She is a writer and editor whose short fiction and articles are used in reading and writing assessments throughout the United States. And I have to remember to ask you how that happened. Her articles on several subjects have appeared in several newspapers. She is also a playwright because, like us, she likes to sit around being bored, not doing much of anything
I can tell.
all day. And two of her plays were performed at the Provincetown Theater Company,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm assuming is in New Hampshire.
It's on Cape Cod, Massachusetts.
Oh, yes, up there. Okay,
Very neat. In her writing, she loves bringing relatable characters to life and depicting them in all their heroic and flawed humanity. Her debut novel, The Taking, was inspired by her interest in UFO folklore and reports of alien encounters. She lives with her husband in Dover, New Hampshire.
All right, the first cocktail I was taken in the first reading by the Iron Stove, and so I came up with a cocktail called the Iron Stove, and this would be a cocktail that can actually keep you warm in addition to that Iron Stove. So we're going to start. It's a bourbon cocktail, so we're going to start with some good old Kentucky bourbon, and then we're going to add some fresh lemon juice, fresh squeeze. And as soon as I find, yes, there we go. There's nothing like fresh squeezed lemon juice or lime juice, and both will be featured in cocktails today. And then we end up with some pineapple juice. So this is kind of an interesting cocktail because with bourbon, typically you might think like a Manhattan or an old fashioned or something like that. But this is going to have a few interesting flavors in it. And one of them will be this pineapple juice that goes in there. And then there's this wonderful stuff called falernum, which is a kind of a tiki cocktail feature, but I've gone in a slightly different direction because the stuff is not so easy to find unless you happen to ship it in. And this is actually using some homemade ginger syrup So I've made some homemade ginger syrup out of some fresh ginger. And in order to make it taste a little bit like falernum, I'm mixing in some lime zest. So the lime zest and the ginger flavor will go in with the rest of the juices and things that we've got. Then we'll add a little bit of simple syrup to give it a bit of sweet. And the last thing we're going to put in, because it's a bourbon cocktail, will be a little bit of Angostura bitters. And I'll throw some ice in there. One of the features of this cocktail that I didn't have enough time to deal with today was you can actually smoke the bourbon before you put it in. So you can burn some wood chips and bring the wonderful smoke from the wood chips into the bourbon and get a neat kind of a flavor. Alrighty. So here we have our nice, warm, and yet kind of fruity cocktail, the
Oh,
Iron
great.
Stove.
So this is
Oh.
the iron stove.
Excellent.
And I always wonder why people name the drinks what they do. But I'm guessing because it can be smoked, maybe that's why they brought in the aspect of
Yeah.
the stove.
So do you think?
You would not know this is a cocktail. This is the kind. Yeah, it's kind of fruity without quite being sweet.
Mhm.
Maybe a
Nice.
little bit sweet. Yeah, but this
Definitely takes the edge off the bourbon. And there's a
Yeah.
non-trivial amount of bourbon in the cocktail. It's about 2 ounces worth.
Yeah.
So, you know,
yeah, so we give you the iron stove.
cheers.
Yay.
Reading number one.
Yay.
Reading number one.
Well done. It looks good.
It tastes good.
Making my mouth water. I'll have to see if we ever do.
Well, we
Kentucky
have to
bourbon.
ask. We try to remember to send all the recipes out to the authors, and I need to ask authors to film themselves,
yeah.
making it or reacting to it. I think that would be a neat addition to the YouTube channel.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
go ahead. Reading number one.
Okay. Alrighty. So the first reading is from chapter 1 of The Taking, and it introduces the main characters, kind of sets the tone for the book. So the first, in this first passage, Vera is 7 years old at this point in the book, and she's waiting alone for her father to come home. And she's feeling very lonely and a bit perturbed and upset that he's not there. Vera thought she heard a truck coming down the road, but when it passed the driveway, she realized that it wasn't her dad's. She moved away from the window and placed herself in the center of a puddle of sunshine on the rug. A second beam of sunlight came through the other window and draped itself over the back of one of the overstuffed chairs. She sat down in the chair in the halo of light and snuggled against one of the big arms, which was as plump and comfortable as the bosom of a matronly aunt. She tucked her hands between the cushions of the chair and fell into a half sleep and let herself dream that her dad would be home soon. She hardly noticed the sun was waning in the late afternoon sky and drawing its light away. She was watching a scene play out in her mind of his truck turning into the driveway. Then he got out of the truck and called her name as he came into the house. She didn't know at first that what she was thinking was real, but the noise of an engine made her open her eyes, and she looked out the window, and in the driveway she saw her dad's truck with the letters stenciled that spelled the name of his business, John De Parma Construction. She pressed her nose to the window and watched as the truck door opened and he stepped out with a bag of groceries in the crook of his arm and his tool belt slung over his shoulder. The urge to run and meet him was so strong that she could hardly resist it. "Vera, where are you?" She didn't answer. She wanted to make him find her. "There you are, sweetie." He walked over to her and knelt down on one knee. "What's the matter?" "Nothing." He hugged her, and she deigned to hug him back, but loosely. "I'm sorry I'm late." Vera stepped away from him. "Where were you?" "I was at work. You've only been home a few minutes anyway, right?" It was longer than a few minutes, but Vera didn't say so. John stared down at the top of his daughter's head and noticed she was shivering. "It's cold in here. Come on, help me start the fire." He let go of her gently and walked to the thermostat. "In the meantime, I'll turn the furnace on. You could have turned up the heat yourself if you were cold. I showed you how, remember? Why didn't you?" "I don't know." My little martyr, he thought. He rotated the thermostat dial until he heard the furnace kick on. Then he went to the wood stove. Vera followed him. "It's ready to light," she said into his ear. He inspected the pyre of kindling and paper she'd already built. He thought to himself how well she'd learned to do the things he taught her. It made him proud that she was so independent. But then there were the things that she refused to do just because he wanted her to do them. "Aren't you going to light it? Hold on, I need a match." He took a long matchstick from a tin box and struck it on the bricks. He put the flame up to the paper between the kindling, and in a few seconds the fire ignited. "I'll fetch some logs from the porch." "I'll get them," Vera said. She stood up before him and rushed to the door. When she came back, she was carrying 2 big logs and a bundle in her arms. He let her throw one of them on the fire by herself. They sat down on the hearth and stared at the growing fire through the glass panel on the door. The cast iron of the wood stove pinged and rang as it warmed. John reached behind Vera and turned on the blower, and a stream of hot air poured out and began to fill the room. Then he reached out for her hands and wrapped them in his big Papa Bear ones. She scooted closer to him, and without realizing it, she began to thaw.
Very nice. You know, my first question was, you make a point of saying in your bio that you really strive to make relatable characters, and I thought you did that so well here, where you capture this conflict between them, that they clearly love each other, especially as I read the whole book. You know, they love each other, but she has this resentment and anger. He's got this guilt. He's always uncomfortable with her. What is your advice to other writers to make these characters relatable, well-rounded, three-dimensional like you did?
Yeah. Well, there's an old adage like torture your characters, right? Have you ever heard that one? Because
I've heard get your character up a tree and then throw stones at them.
yeah, same thing, right? You know, I mean, when you make it something real and there's high stakes, I think that does begin to help you make them relatable, because you're putting them in a situation that, you know, may not be literally the same as something else that somebody else has experienced, but you can paint an emotional reality there, I think. And also with a lot of detail, I believe, that is very important. I think also is the detail, you know, for making the stakes high, and also to write from your heart too. Does that make sense? Write from your heart,
Yes.
to the heart. I was asked
Right.
once, you know, and I came up with that phrase, you know, what style do you write in, or how do you make your characters relatable? And that phrase came to me. That's how I like to write. I find when I do, it seems much more real. It feels more real to me, and I think makes it feel real to the reader
Right.
as well.
Well, and I think even though this book is about alien abduction, which, you know, some people may or may not find far-fetched, this is such an unfortunately common situation where you've got a single parent and they're doing their best, but they just can't be there 24/7. You know, we don't live in a society that makes that so easy anymore. So that alone, I think a lot of people are going to relate to this. He's
Yes.
trying to take care of her by himself.
Right.
So I know that the story was inspired by your interest in UFO stories, but what inspired your interest in the stories to begin with?
Well,
UFO story?
to tell you the truth, I've always been interested in UFOs and the topic of alien abductions all my life. And you know, ever since I was a little kid, I live in New Hampshire, which has some very storied UFO cases that occurred. So I heard about those growing up. And, you know, I was read about the subject, etc. And then also when I was really young, about Vera's age, even though this isn't autobiographical, this book, but I think I saw something, but I'm not sure looking back on it what it was, whether it was a UFO, was an actual spacecraft, or whether it was a dream, or whether it was purely my imagination. I remember it really scared me at the time, and I would forget about it, and then I'd remember it, and I'd forget about it, and I remember it, and this went on for, you know, throughout my life. And then as an adult, at some point, all of a sudden, it stuck in my conscious memory. So that experience somehow played into it. I don't know what it was.
Right.
I wouldn't swear what it was, but
What did it look like?
it was a cigar-shaped object. Actually happened in the schoolyard. So I did draw on a little autobiographical information from me. That's just it, that's it for the whole book of this instant. And I was sitting on a swing or a bench or something at recess, and I was all by myself because normally I had a best friend. We were always hanging out together. She was sick that day. So I was sitting on the bench, and I just happened to look up at the sky, and I saw this object, and it was between two clouds. One tip was sticking in one cloud and the other was in the other cloud. And I just was like, well, what is that? That's so weird. And it was very shiny, very like sort of like alabaster shining in the sun. Very brilliant metal. And I was just like stunned. And so for a second I looked away, I think. And it was if I had a piece of missing time or something. Like when I looked away and then I looked back at it, was just a split second. But I had the feeling that something happened in between. And when I looked up at it, that's again, and it was still there. That's when I got really scared for some reason. Before I was startled and curious, but I just got really scared. And I just took off running back to school. And funny, but by the time, this all happened, I was alone in the schoolyard as I remember it, or as I dreamed it. And I ran back into my classroom, and the class was already started. And I remember thinking it was very strange that nobody seemed to notice me, and that the teacher hadn't stopped, to say, where were you, or whatever, because I thought that I would be in trouble, for being late to class.
Right. Although I had an experience, I didn't see anything. I just kind of didn't notice my class going in, and it was the same thing. I walked in and they didn't really seem to have noticed I was missing, although I did not see anything like UFO. I just didn't hear the bell go off. You mentioned that New Hampshire has a lot of these stories. Do they tend to kind of congregate in certain areas?
Well, they've been in various parts of the state. Of course, New Hampshire's a pretty small state anyway. But there's a couple on the seacoast area where I live that are pretty famous. So one is the Betty and Barney Hill UFO abduction. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but
I am, because I read your blog.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah.
Although I think we had one other guest, Stephanie Sanders Jacob, whose book Singing All the Way Up is about she's an adult by the time the book is over, but it's about how she's been told her whole life that she was abducted by aliens, and she's saying all the way up as she was lifted in this beam of light. And it's about how this impacts her life, how her parents put her on this kind of Comic-Con circuit to speak, except for UFOs. And so, but I was wondering, do UFO stories tend to be in certain parts of the country or in certain countries more than others?
Well, some states have more reports than others. Texas has a lot of reports. California, there are quite a lot in New England. Maine has a really famous alien abduction story of like 4 or 5 guys that were out on a camping trip and canoeing trip, and they were abducted off the Allagash River one night. And that's a really famous story from the 70s. New Hampshire has several big ones, a couple in the seacoast. They're really everywhere, some more than others. Of course, New Mexico has Roswell and the Roswell incident, others. So they're everywhere, but, it's hard to know, because sometimes they're just not reported, and people keep them secret. So a lot of the information will come from like the Mutual UFO Network, if people report them to be investigated and such. And MUFON, their website, Mutual UFO Network, has a lot of information about sightings. Sometimes I'll go on there and see what the most recent sightings are.
I need to go on there. You were going to tell us about the Betty and Barney, I think?
Yeah, just quickly. They were a couple from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, which is on the seacoast in New Hampshire, which is about 60 miles from Boston is where they lived. about 10 miles from me. Anyway, they had made a trip to Montreal, and on the way home, they were driving through the White Mountains of New Hampshire coming south. And while they were in the White Mountains, which is north, way north of here, it's in the northern part of the state where they exist, they saw saw something bright in the sky that she thought was a shooting star. But then it started to act really strange. It was stopping and going, and it was, going up and down. And so it was obviously not a star. She told Barney about it. He was driving, couldn't really see it yet. And he said, oh, it's just a plane. It's just a plane. Anyway, it started to follow them. And it was kind of following them at the sort of the same level as their car and chasing them. And then it was above the car, and then it was behind the car. And they started to get really freaked out because they knew that, they didn't really follow UFOs or flying saucers or anything at the time. I mean, and this was back in 1961.
Right. Where very few people.
Yeah, they'd heard the term, but they weren't interested. But at some point they pulled over because Barney wanted to get a look at it. He had a pair of binoculars in the car, and he got out of the car and he's looking at it through the binoculars, and he saw it had windows, and he said he saw people in the windows and that they were communicating with them telepathically. And they were saying, don't be afraid, don't go anywhere, stay where you are. But he panicked. He got the distinct feeling that they were going to be captured. So he was scared to death. And he yelled at Betty, Betty, get back in the car. So they hop in and they start driving down the road, and the thing's following them. And the last thing they remember is that they heard this beeping sound, and that was it. That's all they remembered. The next thing they remembered, they were driving along. They were 30 miles further south than they had been, and they'd lost an hour and a half or 2 hours, and they had absolutely no idea what had happened to them.
That's terrifying.
Yeah.
I mean, what almost terrifies me the most is to find yourself driving and have no memory. How did they not crash? Yeah, that alone would scare me. I'm going to assume from your conversation that you do believe in alien abductions.
I do. I tend to. I mean, sometimes I say, gee, really? Does it? But I mean, deep down, I think I definitely do. I mean, I've heard a lot of stories. I've talked to investigators. I've somehow or another, I've met a lot of people who say they've either had experiences, sightings of UFOs, or been abducted, and none of the people that I've met sound like they're making it up. They sound like they're very sincere. They also seem to be quite sane. They don't seem like they're nutty in any sense of the word. And there's just a lot of physical evidence that goes along with these reports in many cases. And you just wonder, how do you explain some of it? Yes. Like in the Hills case, for instance, when they arrived home, and they were unpacking their car, they realized that there were these spots on their car that hadn't been there before. Well, come to find out, they reported to Pease Air Force Base, which was nearby at the time, that, they thought they'd seen a flying saucer. So the Air Force sent an officer out to talk to them. He interviewed them. They showed him the spots in the car. He took a Geiger counter, and they were radioactive spots on the back of their car that hadn't been there. That's one thing.
Wow.
There's a lot of evidence for that from that case.
Now, that does lead to the question. A lot of people do think that these UFO experiences are really advanced military equipment. And I know my dad, having been in the military, he was one day reading, I think it was Popular Science, and they were going on about this amazing new, I think it was a submarine. And this was like back in the early 80s, maybe. And he told me, I knew about that 25 years ago. That is nowhere near new. And what is your feeling on that, whether it's actually UFOs or our own military?
Well, I think it's probably both. I don't think that one mutually excludes the other. I bet we do have a lot. We know we have a lot of secret, weapons programs and such that are going on. That's just a given. Some people who have say they're in the know and have worked for the government and seen things and heard things, say that some of these crafts in crashes have been reverse engineered in order to, by the US, not only the US government, but the Soviet, Russian government, and other governments around the world, possibly. So I do think it's both, and I think there probably is a disinformation campaign that the government is involved in that maybe is meant to confuse people. You know, they may claim that something isn't a UFO, is a UFO, or go along with the story and not comment, because if people assume that, they won't start digging deep into what kind of weapons we're building, you know? And of course, they don't want our adversaries to get these secrets from us too. But at the same time, there's so many people who have seen things that seem inexplicable. And they've also, you know, experienced, say they've talked to these beings from other worlds or wherever they come from. And that many people do think that there's a UFO cover-up. And you know, a few years ago, right, they came out, the government said that talked about UAPs and admitted that they're UAPs, and some of them could not be explained. I guess
Well, I very definitely believe in abduction because my heart was abducted by you.
Aw, that's so sweet.
So sweet.
What a charmer.
He is. That's why I'm here.
Yeah.
So the next drink that we have is actually called the hockey puck. And this is what I was taken by in the scene here. This is a very interesting drink in that it's a 3-layer drink using some chilled Kahlua, chilled Baileys, and then some chilled Grand Marnier or something equivalent like a triple sec or things like that. And so we're going to start with putting into a tall stem glass. It can also go in a shot glass, but I'm going to start with this. Just some of the Kahlua, so we get that wonderful coffee flavor.
Nice.
So can you kind of see that these backgrounds, because we're not actually in a real medieval tavern? I hope it's not a disappointment.
This changes everything. I thought, you know.
I know, it's shocking. What's going in next?
And then so what I'm going to do is take some Baileys and pour it very gently over a spoon so that it layers in over the top of the Kahlua. And this is basically an exercise in different specific gravities of different liqueurs. And we're being very gentle so that we try not to mix
Oops.
the liqueurs.
You went too fast.
Right. And then last, and I thought I had Grand Marnier in the cabinet, but what I do have is triple sec. So Grand Marnier is basically cognac and an orange liqueur like triple sec. So in this case, we're just going to do the triple sec and get that kind of flavor going in it as well. So, and again, we're going to try to pour it over the spoon because we want it to be very gently layered in just on top.
These ones seem to be sort of the same color.
Well, this one's clear, the triple sec is anyway.
Okay.
And so the challenge is it's kind of diluting the very top of the Baileys, but it's coming in anyway into the glass. And so now we have the hockey puck.
That looks really yummy.
Yeah, there's the middle layer there is where the triple sec ended up, and the Baileys is floating on top and the Kahlua down on the bottom. And so, yeah, you have that kind of black hockey puck there in the bottom of the glass. So here is our hockey puck for reading number 2.
Well done.
And when you tip it back, you get all 3 of them together.
That's like a milkshake.
Yeah.
That is really tasty.
And yet it's nothing but alcohol.
Right.
So
This is why we have snacks here. We're not doing this on empty stomachs. If you're going to drink responsibly with lots of food.
Yeah. Well, very creative.
And for reading number 2.
Here is reading number 2.
Okay. Okay, so the second reading is from chapter 8, so it's later in the book. And in this passage, Vera's friend RJ, who has been her friend all her life, is practicing hockey alone. And actually, he's a teenage boy at this point in the book. Both he and Vera are teenagers. And while he's practicing hockey, he notices something in the distance on the pond where he's skating. When RJ stood on his skates, his legs felt strong and sturdy, and his whole body felt fit and relaxed. His muscles were wound and ready to explode with energy, but he took it easy and skated around in circles for a while. And with every rotation, he picked up a little more speed and power. At last, he skated to center ice and made a shot at the goal, and the puck went in. He kept making shots for a long time from different angles and from different distances from the net, and he practiced defense too. Shards of ice flew off his skates as he rushed up and down dozens of times, and when he took his first break, he felt like his lungs were going to burst. While he caught his breath, he slowly skated toward a small island until the snow became too deep for him to continue, and he stopped. When he was young, he went to the island a lot with his friends. They paddled to it in his canoe to camp, and when they were there, they practically lived on the blueberries that grew on the island in thickets along the shore. In the summer, it had a dozen different kinds of songbirds that nested there in the trees. Around the shore, he saw leftover stalks of weeds encased like fossils under the ice. The island had changed since he was a kid. Each year, when the weather was temperate, the ring of vegetation around the island spread a little farther out into the water, and the pond got smaller. It was now twilight, and he noticed that the tops of the trees had become smudgy silhouettes against the sky, and he thought it was time to go home. He skated back and removed his skates, and as he was about to leave, he saw a small light in the distance near the other shore. At first it was still, but then it began to move in a line above the snow-packed ice. It was so faint that he had to watch for a few minutes to be sure it wasn't a reflection from a car headlight. It vanished and came back again, and each time it reemerged closer to the shore. He strained his eyes to see exactly what it was. Slowly, he realized that there was a person out there, but he couldn't imagine what the person was doing hiking around the frozen pond in the deep snow.
What really jumped out to me about this, and this is probably because we moved less than 2 years ago from northern Minnesota to Tennessee. And so I can really relate to this scene, except I was thinking as I first read it, when I lived in Duluth, I wouldn't have thought twice about this. Now, what kind of average snowfall do you get where you are?
Oh, we have pretty good winters. I don't know how many measures in feet, but we can expect snow. Usually, we'll get some in December. A lot of times we have big storms in February and March. So, yeah.
Nor'easters, right?
Nor'easters, yes, are sometimes what we get.
What kind of, how many feet do you tend to get? I mean, it sounds like they're in a place that gets a lot of snow.
Yeah, well, we can get a lot of snow. I mean, we can get a storm that's 1.5 feet, 2 feet at a time. There was, sometimes it's 6 inches, sometimes it's 8, sometimes it's 3. Sometimes it'll snow, a few
Sometimes
inches.
it's 36.
Little snow divisions, but we can certainly get big storms. I remember one storm that we got almost 3 feet. Now that's rare, 3 feet at a time, but 1.5 feet, 2 feet is not unusual.
Well, what struck me was that if I were reading this when we still lived in Duluth, and our last winter there was horrible. We had 15 feet of snow, and there were days that literally just snowed all day long. We'd get dumped with, right, for days on end. And I wouldn't have thought that much about this scene. It would have just been normal. But now that we're in Tennessee, and the last 2 winters have been pretty snowy compared to normal, and yet still, I think we got 9 inches of snow all winter this past winter, and that was a really bad winter for the area. And so all of a sudden it jumped out at me like, my gosh, trying to wade through 2 feet of snow, having to do all this plowing, because earlier in this scene, because I read the whole book, he's doing all this plowing for customers. He's in his tractor. My son spends sometimes 5-6 hours a day plowing for us just on our driveway. And it made me wonder, do you get any feedback from people who live in the South going, aren't you exaggerating this a little bit?
No, I haven't yet. I mean, that may be possible. It may be possible that they wouldn't relate. What I do for work, you mentioned, I write tests, English language arts tests. So some of the states that I write for are in the South, and I know that we have to sometimes be sensitive to the fact that they're not used to, they don't get, winter like we know it, in the North. And so if you want to, you do a passage about snow. I mean, it's not that you cannot mention snow, but the questions that you write can't be dependent on their understanding of what it's like to live through a snowy winter, So I get what you're saying.
So, and this is for the writing. So you write pieces specifically for this testing that was mentioned in your bio?
Yeah, I'm an English language arts content developer and mostly assessments. So I write for K through 12 assessments for reading and writing. So I write passages, I write test questions, I write rubrics, I write all sorts of technical writing has to do with that goes into a test.
How did you end up in a field like that? I assume they took your short stories and used them, but you're writing these specifically for the test.
Yeah. How did I end up in that? Well, I mean, I had a background in writing and an English language arts person, and I'd written for newspapers and I'd done tutoring. And then I went to work for a company it was an assessment company. And my first job was as a program associate. So I wasn't a test developer yet, but I worked on the contracts, the administration of the contracts and running the program for the states. And then I was, I applied for a job as a test developer and an editor, and I got it. So I've been doing that for 21 years. Now I'm a consultant. I do it on my own. But the company I worked for 14 years. 14 years.
Is that mostly K through 12, or do you also do things like SAT, GMAT, GRE, type verbal tests as well?
Well, for the assessment writing and it's mostly K through 12. Some of it is to test, like I have worked on contracts like for the College Board, and they write the SAT to as prep for SAT taking. So that they'll take a test that's similar to the SAT in school to be prepared for the SAT. So I wrote passages and items for that. And I actually was an SAT tutor for a while. Verbal.
You know this stuff well. I wanted to go back to the question of the writing. I'm curious what kind of research you did for this book. Did you personally interview people who believe they've been abducted by aliens?
I have interviewed people who believe they have, yes. I didn't do that research for this book. That came earlier because when I was in grad school, and plus I just had opportunities even before that to talk to people. But when I was in grad school, I took an anthropology class. We had to write an ethnography about a culture other than our own. So I asked my professor if I could write about UFO folklore. And of course, he was like, well, why do you want to write about that? And is it really a culture? And I had to kind of talk him into it, but he let me do it. He said, all right, see what you make of it. So for that,
That's funny.
It gave me an opportunity to interview a lot of people and talk to people, including the niece of Betty and Barney Hill, Kathleen Martin, who's a ufologist, and she's like a UFO investigator and trainer of investigators. And she's also a sociologist. So that was fascinating because I heard all about Betty and Bill Barney Hill's story firsthand, and she had just written a book about it. And, my God, it was so scary. But anyway, so that gave me the opportunity to talk to people in depth about it.
And then did you also do a lot of reading books or stories? Okay.
I did. I was just going
to ask
Sure.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that, yes, as far as books, I read a lot of books and articles. I read a book by a psychiatrist. His name is John Mack. He was a he was a Harvard psychiatrist who treated people who purportedly were abducted by aliens.
Mhm.
And he wrote case studies of these, anonymous case studies. And when I read his writings, I really got an idea for this book, The Taking. That's really what inspired the story. Not that I took anything literally from it, but it made me think differently about the whole thing like I never had before. I said to myself, wow, this is really a human story. This is a story about people who are suffering and who are traumatized by these things that are happening to them. But yet, a lot of times nobody believes them. And they're left with this situation where they have to try to find a way to live with what's going on and cope with it when they're full of fear, when they can't predict what's going to happen next. They don't know if there's any way for them to have a normal life. And so that made me think, wow, that would really make, I thought, a great story for a book. It had all the elements of drama and suspense and mystery, and tragedy.
And that really comes out in your third reading, which is a perfect segue to
Okay.
number 3.
So this brings.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry,
Yes,
I'm listening.
sorry, say again.
I was just going to go bring up the third reading, but go ahead. I did. So.
Yes, right. We have the third cocktail, which I call the Artist's Shack, and I was inspired by that aspect of the third reading. And it's also known as the Artist's Special. And so I'm going to serve it in a martini glass because what better thing to do on a if you're on the beach on plein air, making a painting like Van Gogh used to, or writing a story or things like that. And this cocktail is definitely inspired by those types of thoughts. And again, it's a bourbon cocktail, so the other artist we can think might be part of this might be Ernest Hemingway. But we're going to start with some bourbon. One of my favorite books of his, in addition to all of his wonderful stories, is To Have and Have Another, which is actually his book of cocktail recipes. And they are very robustly full of alcohol. Let's just say that. In terms of the types of recipes he would come up with. So we started with some bourbon in this cocktail, and now we're going to go to some dry sherry in it. So we're mixing some bourbon and dry sherry. Now we're going to put some fresh squeezed lemon juice that I made a little earlier today. And there's nothing like that versus trying to get something like real lemon from the store. It's just not the same. Fresh squeezed lemon juice is quite nice. And then the last thing we're going to put in, we could either use red currant syrup. So again, we're kind of being very arty with something like that, but that's a little difficult to get. So with either raspberry syrup or in this case, grenadine, we're going to give it a little bit of sweet and a nice red color to go along with everything else that's there. And given that we've got dry sherry and bourbon, I'm sure the sweet will probably appreciate it. Also balancing the lemon juice. So we throw that in a shaker. And now I will pour it in a couple of martini glasses. And this is a wonderfully red because of the grenadine. It's got an almost glow to it.
It does.
Which is really kind of neat.
Very artistic.
Very summery, very arty. We can imagine, unlike an absinthe bar where everyone would just be plowed under, we can imagine people, having this cocktail and, actually being able to produce something, on the shoreline or whatever.
Isn't that beautiful?
But here we have the Artist's Shack. Cheers.
Wow. Oh, yay. It looks yummy. That's for sure.
That's a little strong for my taste.
We always go camping with our friends in the summer. I think I'll make that cocktail, the Artist's Shack, for them next summer when we meet again.
You should love it.
It's got a very strong flavor, and this one definitely tastes more like alcohol.
Yes.
Right. I'd be sipping that very, very slowly.
One thing that could be done with that is actually to put that over ice in a tall glass with a little bit of club soda and also some
that
mint,
would cut it a little.
Mold into it as well. That would make it even summerier, if that's a word.
Right.
Wonderful.
Well, I think we're ready for reading number 3.
Yep. Reading number 3.
Sure, thank you. So the last reading comes from, much further ahead in the book, and it occurs at a pivotal moment for one of the characters. And in this scene, he's gone to a small mountain, and it's early one winter morning. Peter began walking fast to match the speed of dawn. The emerging sound of cars in the distance broke the illusion of remoteness for him, making him think about his crew. They'd be leaving to go to work soon and expecting to see him there. Up ahead, he saw the opening in the trees that led to where he intended to go. He turned there and stepped onto a narrow footpath that cut through a dense thicket of evergreen trees, the scruffy, low-lying kind that grew near the sides of cliffs. The branches lashed at his body, and their needles stuck him in the face as he followed the tight path to its endpoint. Finally, he walked into the open onto a cliff that protruded over the valley. Far off in the distance, he could already faintly see the ocean. It was a smudgy, ethereal line of blue across the horizon, 40 miles to the east. He'd always lived that close to it, and now he regretted that he'd missed so many chances to go there more often. But the past was the past, and he couldn't change anything. One summer, he and his family spent 2 weeks on vacation in Provincetown, Massachusetts. He'd explored the dunes and the beach there for hours. It impressed him that Provincetown, just a little patch of sand on the fist of Cape Cod, jutted defiantly into the Atlantic Ocean as if it was tempting Mother Nature to pummel it with storms. He closed his eyes, and it felt like he was walking along the quaint streets of Provincetown again, past the rows of Cape and Victorian houses bunched together, stone walls wrapped around the tiny properties, and the yards were speckled with flower gardens and flower pots bursting with rainbows of blues. One day, he took a tour of the historic dune shacks, where a generation of artists and writers had lived and worked in the summers many decades ago. Some of them were authors whose books he forced himself to read in high school. But after visiting the shacks where they created some of their masterpieces, he read them again, but this time with a fresh attitude and an open mind. In his imagination, he pictured those geniuses sitting by campfires on the beach, passionately debating about art and politics and drinking under the stars. And he could almost hear the ocean as they'd heard it, roaring in the blackness on those magical summer nights. And he thought that was what it felt like to live.
This
Very
is right. And especially once you know the rest of the story and what he's doing and why he's there, it really is very pivotal and it impacts the ending. One thing I was really curious about when I got to the end, it's left hanging. It's left without a clear answer as to how Vera is going to handle all of this and what's going to happen next. Why did you choose to use that kind of ending with this story?
Well, let's see. Well, first of all, I guess as my writer instincts were telling me that's how I needed to end the story. And I think all along as I was writing the story, my intent was not to try to answer any questions about what's really happening. What is this? Not, I don't mean in the book, but I meant just like the whole mystery. I have no answers. I don't know. I didn't want to behave or act or write like I had solutions or I could resolve any of this mystery, because it is a mystery. No one knows. And I think that what makes it eerie, suspenseful, the whole mystery is that we do not know. And that's what makes us so curious at this point anyway about it. And that's how a lot of victims are left feeling. They don't know. They cannot tell what's going to happen next. And it just seemed like a fitting way to end the book. And I thought, it was also a dramatic way to end the book, too. I thought maybe it had a certain emotional power to it if you left it with the reader wondering what's going to happen with Vera.
Right. And I think that there are definitely two types of readers in the world, some who can appreciate that and some who want to get your address and kidnap you and make you finish the story.
Yeah, you're right, I'm sure.
I got to tell you, I fall in the second camp and now I know where you live.
Yeah, okay, sorry. Well,
somewhere in New Hampshire.
I know that's
false
true. I
We'll
asked
heed
one
you
person.
well.
I had one person,
Um,
she said, "Yeah, I want to know what happened." I said, "Well, were you disappointed?" And she said, "No, I wasn't disappointed, but I just was so curious." So, yeah, you're right. You're right. I do run that risk.
But I
Of
think
course, if I
that
wanted to
you're
write a sequel, I guess I could, because
exactly, and I was curious if you planned on writing a sequel, if that's why you left it a little bit open-ended.
not deliberately.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's possible to write a sequel. When I was writing it, I wasn't writing it with in mind necessarily of writing a sequel, although I thought it might be possible to write a sequel. And maybe I will. I'm working on another book now. It's not a sequel, but I could write another sequel.
Right.
I just felt, what I really liked? I liked and I won't describe it, but I liked the visual that I left at the end of the book. I thought that was, I just like the drama of it. I'm a drama
It is
queen.
dramatic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
And I think that in some books, this kind of an ending can work. And I think yours is the type of book where it can work as people contemplate, especially in light of what's happening to some of the other characters and what we learn, they can contemplate, what would I do? Which way am I going to go? I think we know which way Vera plans on going in handling a life she didn't ask for and doesn't want. But is she going to be able to do what she wants to do? And that brings up the question, throughout the book, we see various scenes of these aliens doing things to people. What do you think they want? Because that question is always brought up. Why are they doing this? What do they want to know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of people have different answers or multiple answers to that question. So I can only draw on what I've read from people who think about it very, a lot. And some people think that they're here to do genetic testing on human beings, to create an alien hybrid race, and that they've already done that, and they're already, that's well underway. And for what purpose? Well, it could be nefarious reasons. It could be to benefit humankind, or to save the human species, or to help us to get to the next plane of evolution somehow, mentally, spiritually, physically.
Right.
So those are some of the theories that are kicked around. Also, you got to ask yourself this question. Not a lot of people say, because there are sightings of aliens who seem to be quite different from each other. How many species are here, have visited us? We see a lot of reports of the gray aliens, the skinny ones with the big heads, etc. But people talk about other otherworldly creatures that are here, like Nordic looking people, blonde.
Oh, I have
hair,
not heard that one.
tall, reptilian. I think I've heard like 5 different types of aliens. And people have different theories about who they are and where they come from. I spoke with somebody who thinks that they're evolved earthlings, humans, who went and lived underground tens of thousands of years ago due to some cataclysm, and they had to go underground to live. And those are the people who we see as aliens now, not extraterrestrials.
Have you heard the idea that some people think that these are actually demons posing as aliens?
I have heard that too. Yes, I've read a couple of things by religious scholars who say that. And
what do you think of that possibility?
I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't say that I would rule it out altogether. I mean, I'm a Christian. I believe in God. I have religious faith, spiritual faith. I believe in the good versus evil. So therefore, possibly, yes. And it could be. I mean, if there are demons in the world, they're certainly paranormal. They're certainly scary, and who knows where they come from. And maybe some races of aliens, if they're extraterrestrial aliens, maybe they are demonic. You know, maybe they could be evil. There's evil human beings just as there's good human beings. You'd think the same would be true from a species from another world, that they would have that duality in their nature.
You would definitely think so. And I guess I figure if aliens exist, God created all of us, them and us. This is your first novel after a lifetime of writing other types of writing, newspaper articles and so on. How did you find it different, or how did you find it the same as your other writing?
Well, it was I had just taken a stab or two at writing a novel in the past. I hadn't stuck with them. I knew it would be a challenge because it was my first novel, and writing a book is a big challenge. Writing a novel is a huge challenge for anyone, I think. But I felt prepared for it because I have a lot of experience. I've written short fiction and, all kinds of writing. And I've always written. I've always found a way to try to work and develop the craft over the years, and gone out of my way for that. And and then especially since I thought at long last I really had a story idea that I was really interested in, that I thought had the stuff to make a novel, that I could, a really clear story where I could see the arc of the plot and everything. That made it a little easier in a sense. It didn't make it easy, the writing necessarily. But at any rate, I felt like I was prepared because everything had brought me, I think, that I've done had brought me to this point. Right. And I had a lot of professional experience and know-how, and, it was seasoned professional in a lot of ways.
Right. And just very briefly, what is your next book?
Well, the working title is called The Ground Under Their Feet. And it's different. I mean, it's inspired by my dad's side of the family, my Italian American family. Mm-hmm. And so it's the main setting is in the 1940s. So it's inspired by my dad's family. It's fiction, but a lot of the characters are taken from people that I, in my life, or that I didn't know, but I know of. And then it's also has some throwbacks to the early 1900s when they first came to the United States from America, and some of it's in Italy. And so I'm about halfway done with the first draft. And here again, it's pretty, has a lot of dramatic moments in it. There's suspense in it. It's got the mafia in it. There's high stakes.
Well, any book on Italians, right?
Like I said, I'm a drama queen. I worked in the theater a lot, so I was a director and actor, playwright. So I like epic, dramatic stuff. Stories that talk about real big issues, but tell them through the lives of ordinary people.
And I think that works really well because all of us at some point are going to face, situations we didn't expect. So that kind of book is great. Hopefully not finding ourselves on the wrong end of the mafia, though. Where can people find you online?
Is there a right end?
I don't think there is. I guess
it's a mixed mafia and aliens in this book. No, I'm only kidding.
Well, that's right. Yeah, that'd even be better.
That would be original, wouldn't it? Well, on my website, Dona Masi, DONAMASI.com. And there's also an order button there, so it'll take you where you can order the book if you care to. And then also I'm on Facebook, and I'm on Instagram, and I'm on LinkedIn, and a bit on TikTok.
Okay.
And what kind of links do you have, Laura? And I'm guessing they're not to do with Knockhurst.
No. That almost went over my head. You can find us at booksandbrews.net and at YouTube at Symbol Books and Brews, where you'll also find Books and Brews Light videos with many more authors. I think we're up to, I think I'm at about 45 interviews for Books and Brews Light, and
Wow.
you're 75 for Books and Brews Full Podcast. You can find me and my books at lauravosica.com. You can find pictures of the ram who trampled me at glenmerrillfarms.wordpress.com.
Who happens to be in our freezer now.
So,
Well, and in our stomachs.
Yes, he's delicious.
We had some really nice lamb lasagna with a Moroccan twist when my son and his wife were here. It was delicious. And you can find our sponsor, Gabriel Sworn Press, at gabrielswornpress.com. All of these are at Instagram. All of them are at Facebook. And Gabriel Sworn Books is on Twitter, where we post about all of this. Do you have any upcoming public events that people can attend?
I'm not firmly. I'm trying to get into a couple of libraries, particularly the Exeter, New Hampshire Library this summer, and I'm talking to them about that. I because the Exeter, New Hampshire, which is nearby where I live, has a UFO festival every Labor Day week. Because
Okay.
nearby there was a UFO incident that's pretty famous called the
Okay.
incident at Exeter. So every year they have the UFO festival, and thousands of people go there. So I'd like to get into the library either before
would be
that or
perfect.
right after it, and pick
Okay.
up on
And
that.
Laura, do you have any upcoming UFO events or
We
other events?
we do not have any public events of being abducted by UFOs. In fact, we don't have any public events. Gabriel Sworn did just put out Cooking with Rabbit, and that's a recipe book. In fact, it's my recipe book.
Yes,
Nice.
indeed.
And we recently put out our two most recent anthologies of poetry on the topics of faith and music. And Gabriel Sworn is accepting submissions of traditional forms of poetry on the subject of children for the 2025 anthology.
Do we happen to have someone coming next month onto our wonderful show, Laura?
Why we do. I'm expecting to have Sam Ritchie with her book, Within Walls. Yes, they do talk. And given some experiences both I and we have had with houses, I'm really interested to hear what she has to say about her experiences with sensing negative energy in homes and what to do about that. Our energy wasn't negative. Our energy in our last home was
Benevolent, but
playful.